Could you tell us your name?
Joyce K. Laben, or Joyce Laben,
And where did you grow up?
Grand Rapids, Michigan,
And when did you start teaching at Vanderbilt?
1970.
And how long did you teach?
I taught from 1970 to 1998, but the dean really wouldn't let me go, so I did some other stuff through 2007.
And what did you teach?
I taught undergraduate and graduate psychiatric nurses, so the graduate would be psychiatric nurse practitioners. I also did an interdisciplinary course called Violence Impact on the Healthcare System for people from like the law school, divinity school, medical school, nursing school. And then I taught a course for several years called Law, Ethics, and Politics in Healthcare.
And how did the environment and climate for students at Vanderbilt compare to your own undergraduate experience?
Well, I went undergraduate to the University of Michigan, which was much bigger. And this is much smaller university and not as overwhelming, I think, although what we ended up doing once you started really into the nursing curriculum, you lived in a nursing dormitory across from the hospital, but you took courses on campus, so you'd have to walk down there. But it's, the men and women, more men and women together. I was pretty much isolated. There were hardly any men taking nursing. But part of it was really fun because I come from a family. My father went to Michigan. 10 of my, 2 of my brothers went there, one to medical school, one to law school, and I've had nephews and nieces and nephews graduating from there. Big football fans from the time you're tiny, you hear to cheer for Michigan. So it's a little bit different. It's so much bigger and potentially overwhelming than to me it would be at Vanderbilt.
And what brought you to Vanderbilt initially?
Well, I was teaching at Boston University, and I became unhappy with the dean there. And she put me in a position where she had sent out a questionnaire about what people thought about the School of Nursing and how she was conducting it, and that she wouldn't look at individual replies, just the summaries. And then she demanded to see what everybody had written. And I went to a lawyer friend of mine, even though I had a law degree, and that law firm put all of the information in their lockbox so she couldn't get it. And I decided that wasn't the environment I wanted, and someone recommended that I interview at Vanderbilt, which I did, and that's how I came down here.
Did you ever practice nursing or law?
Oh, yes. Are you kidding me? They wouldn't let you be in the School of Nursing unless you're doing some practice. Yes, I worked in clinics, various clinics, seeing psychiatric patients, usually patients who had a lot of acting out violently or committed crimes.
And how did you integrate your nursing degree and your law degree in your career?
I developed the Modern Day Forensic Mental Health Program because I had a disagreement with this dean when I first came down, and I have a copy of what went on in that disagreement it was generally with all the faculty. He wanted to reorganize the way the school was organized, but he was not very kind to older faculty members. And so I worked with a psychiatrist with my students, and he became commissioner of mental health. And he asked me to come down and change the forensic unit and develop a program. And I was able to get leave for 2 years to do that. And essentially what I did, because a Supreme Court decision called Jackson versus Indiana had come down, and it said that you couldn't keep somebody on the issue of competency to stand trial, which means, do you know what you're charged with, and do you know the consequences of those charges? And the place where they were sent for evaluation, they wanted me to reorganize that unit and develop a program. So when I arrived, I discovered, we went over, had 2 outside lawyers look at the records, and 90% of the people were illegally detained. So I worked to get them transferred and worked to develop a system of care. And there's an article that just came out on me. I have a copy of it. You might want to read. It was from the nursing school, and it talked, actually, because we have funded a scholarship for a psych nurse practitioner at Vanderbilt. That was the primary reason, but they looked back at that experience that I had, and it's defined, and you really need to read that to get a feeling of what it was like. For example, I saw them feeding somebody who was neurologically impaired. They were feeding him off the floor, things like that. So we were able to get the population down from about 150 to maybe 60 or in a couple years. And there was a psychiatrist affiliated with the Lab for Community Psychiatry at Harvard who had developed a questionnaire of how to question people if you're evaluating them for competency to stand trial. In the clinic that I used to take my psychiatric students to in the Boston area, the physician who was there, the psychiatrist, was affiliated with the Lab for Community Psychiatry. So this fellow that had developed this questionnaire came down, and I was able to have a big conference and to teach the people who were going to be doing this. And then I realized that the best way was not to send people, and most of them came from Memphis, to a maximum security unit, just one isolated unit away. And I wanted them evaluated at the major cities, which would have been Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and up in East Tennessee. So I developed teams of evaluators. And because I was a nurse and a female, did not have a PhD, only a JD, Juris Doctor in Law, I figured I couldn't get any money from the National Institute of Mental Health. So I found a funding agency, the Tennessee Law Enforcement Planning Agency, and when I first applied, of course, they turned me down. But then I found out who was on the board and some judges, and I befriended them. So I was able to fund through there. We changed the law. We went through the legislature and changed the law. And later, after Vanderbilt, after 2 years, pretty much told me I had to come back to Vanderbilt. They needed me. And so the law, the fellow in charge of law and legal issues at the National Institute of Mental Health heard what I did. Couldn't believe it. Gave somebody a grant to come down here and see how I had done it. And after that, he put me on the team to go all over the country and evaluate other grants. So, you know, it was kind of a miracle And I had very good support with the Assistant Commissioner of Mental Health and the Commissioner of Mental Health, but it was not easy. You know, the legislature wasn't really happy with the female trying to get a law passed. So,
To go back to that point that you just made, did you find that you face a lot of gender-based discrimination along your journey, especially at Vanderbilt or in your career?
well, especially in changing that system, you know, in dealing with psychiatrists who are primarily male and psychologists. And it was only, I can remember my first team was down in Memphis, and I could remember just having some difficulty with psychiatrists who were going to go down to the jail and interview people. They didn't want to give them a parking spot, and then the psychiatrist didn't want to do it, and I had to take the psychiatrist and go down to the jail and negotiate with them for parking places, things like that. But it wasn't so difficult. I didn't have that same difficulty in the other places.
Did you face any discrimination as a faculty member at Vanderbilt?
Well, I personally didn't, but my colleagues, the first 2 years, when things were changing so much, some of the older faculty members, which is described in that document, about things he would do is put them up on a floor where it needed to be renovated and they were dirty. And there was one person who had been dean at one time, and she had a thing coming down on a wire, a lamp, over her desk and things like that. But personally, in dealing with other men on campus, not too much.
Do you think that those circumstances were unique to the nursing school, or did you see any of your other colleagues across Vanderbilt face any sort of issues during that time?
Well, you know, I didn't have too much contact with other people like that, but you know, occasionally, I saw probably the thing that struck me the most, and I can't remember if it's when I was in the Senate or was at another committee meeting when they were voting to admit the same amount of female students as males, and they voted it down. They wanted more male students, and there was somebody that I knew, and she heard me tell this in class, that I screamed at him when I got out of there at the top of my lungs about what he had done. And so I felt that kind of discrimination. Now, as far as in the School of Nursing and students, we had very few male students, but they seemed to get along really well with the female students, especially in this course I taught law, ethics, and politics in healthcare. I hadn't gone to any reunions for years, but I kept getting notes left for me. And so finally one year, a couple of years ago, it was the 25th anniversary for some people. I can't tell you. It must have been 4 or 5 former students 25 years later came up and thanked me for teaching that course because they had learned so much. But what I would do especially is talk about what was going on in the country in relationship to healthcare and how this impacted our practice. And I think it really helped them when they got out and went into practice. And I think as nurses get master's and doctoral degrees, there's more and more respect for nursing now, especially in rural communities where, you know, there aren't psychiatrists available. maybe I should tell you a little bit about when I've been subpoenaed to court to tell
Sure.
about my patients. They always assumed that I wouldn't know, and the one that stands out with me is after I retired, I spent from 1999 through 2001, I worked in a private psychiatric practice with psychiatrists. I was the executive vice president, and the fellow who headed up had been the commissioner of mental health when I developed the program. And anyway, I had seen a patient in private practice, and she had brought a suit against Metro government for people not being very nice to her as a female working there. And the person defended the course was a former law student who'd taken my violence impact on the healthcare system, was defending it. So she was very anxious because I was no longer with the psychiatric group, so I got subpoenaed. And who came to cross-examine me but a doctor/lawyer from another southern state, and he just really thought he had me. Well, she told me to bring my whole curriculum vitae to give to the jury. So anyway, every question he asked me, I knew, and they had, because I didn't have the record, they had subpoenaed the record, and I had a copy of it. And one of the things was, she said she never had psychiatric help before she came to Nashville. Well, I had something in my record as where she had been treated in another place. She ultimately lost her suit. But then the person who defended her contacted me, and, the former student, and told me that the judge, the federal judge, it was in federal court, had said I testified better than the psychiatrist with whom I had worked. But, legally, I'd been into court a lot, so. But I have to tell you, I was a little spooked when I heard, about his background. But anyway, so.
So I'd love to go back to, you said that there were not that many men in your classes, it was mostly women. Did you find that there were different stereotypes around women or men in the nursing school?
Well, let me tell you, this is just a recent incident. There's something called the Julia Herford Society. It's a fundraising group. And when they had their last meeting recently, one of my former students, who's a member of that, a male, befriended my husband. And he told me that a former colleague of mine, and it must have been after I left, or it could have been at the same time, she was teaching at the time, told him that male students shouldn't be taking nursing. To this day, he still remembers that, and he has really bonded with my husband. My husband has an extra football ticket, so he's always bringing friends to get my husband's extra football ticket. Who would have ever thought at a thing like that? But I was stunned to hear about who did it. And it's something I would never have done. I was just thrilled to see male students.
Did you see men or women competing equally within the nursing school?
Yes. I never had anybody really come to me and say that males, that they were being treated badly. One of the things I used to do, because one time I had to teach a course in the morning and then one at 6 to 9 at night, and especially when you're teaching 1 to 6 at 9 at night and you've already taught it in the morning, you think to yourself, ooh, did I say this before? whatever. But because I knew that students would be really, really tired, I did people down in the front row, I would feed them snacks. And they would know it from group to group, because the first day of class they would come flying down. And it was male and female in the front row. It wasn't just like all male or anything. Anyway, you haven't asked me about how I dealt with psychiatrists.
I'd love to hear about it.
All right. Well, in the early 80s, I'll have to go back a little, the nursing school has been under the chancellor and then under the medical school starting in 1984, or a little bit after, when Colleen Conway Welch came as a dean. And anyway, she expected everybody to practice and so forth. And we had started a nursing clinic at Vine Hill Clinic here in Nashville. I'll never forget going to Dean Welch's house one day for an evening meal. A group of us were having a meeting, and she said to me, "And you'll go over there and start a psychiatric nursing practice." I thought, oh dear, because it was in the evening. But anyway, so we went over there, and at that time we weren't prescribing. Later we were. And I had a male psychiatrist who was a Vanderbilt faculty member, who was out at Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute training residents, but also had to come. And he came very, very grumpy. So you know what I did? I figured, because it was in, like from maybe 5 to 9 or 6 to 9, I began bringing him treats, being very nice to him. And he was really appreciative. When I retired, and I almost brought it, but it wasn't a real thick thing that was very, very heavy. And he wrote a note when I retired saying that he would really, really miss me in practice and in my treats to him. But anyway, you figure out ways when you work with people like that, how to calm them down. And he came to have a great deal of respect for what I did. And one evening there was, drug salesmen all come all the time, to see psychiatrists and so forth. There was one there. And I had just finished telling the psychiatrist that this patient who had a major mental illness, I'd helped him get a job. And the drug salesman said, "You got somebody with a major mental illness a job?" And the psychiatrist said, "Oh, that's Joyce. She does stuff like that." So, you have a little bit of that, and not so much of it. It just varies.
So what was your experience like working with women versus men?
Well, you really bonded with each other as women in experiences. When I went to Michigan, I have to tell you this Michigan story. We were all pretty close. And by the way, this is our 60th anniversary, and I'm not going. I went for the 50th. But when I went to Michigan, there was something called the Michigan Union, and women could not walk through the front door. So when we went back on our 50th anniversary, we all had pictures of walking through the front door. But the interesting thing is, we thought that was just the rule, and we didn't really. It was before Gloria Steinem and so on, and once that began to happen, we were much, much more observant about what was going on. Before, it was just like, well, this is the way of the world. So it changed a great deal.
Were you ever involved in any of the movements for women, or on campus, or before?
Well, probably not, because I was so so busy, you know, except when I spoke up at meetings and so forth. You know, other administrators. I have another really nice story to tell you. When in the early 80s, when they were thinking about closing down the School of Nursing, they said it wasn't doing well. You know, we weren't getting that many students or anything. All the tenured faculty were called in and said, you better figure it out or you're not going to be here anymore. And it was a group of males who came down and did that. Well, I was assigned to a person who was like an assistant or associate provost named Tivis Nelson. And he did the financial end of it. And I worked with him very, very, very closely about figuring out how we were going to manage the finances so we wouldn't get closed. Well, ironically, he had 2 relatives who had major mental health problems. And he asked if, we would see one of them at Vine Hill Clinic, which we did. And then later on, I helped him get help. When I was in private practice one day, I came to work and he was sitting there and he was having some problems. So to this day, I still hear from him. At Christmas, he no longer here. And when he retired, someone else got up and talked about the fact that he saved the nursing school. So that was a really good relationship. He never treated me, like I was lowly or anything, or I'm going to get you. And at one point when we opened Vine Hill Clinic, I don't know if you know, and I don't know if it's still in existence, if you did something for another school or something, you had to owe them something. Anyway, when we opened Vine Hill Clinic, they wanted to charge us and pay certain money back to the university. We couldn't have made it financially, and he was able to call them off and fix it for us. So, that relationship. And I never heard the tenured faculty ever complain about anybody else that they were dealing with, that they thought that they weren't being nice or collaborative. But we were able, to save the School of Nursing. And then eventually, I don't know if you know, they stopped the baccalaureate program and now only have masters and doctorates. And they're so busy, they're having to expand the school building. So they're doing really, really well now.
So you said all the tenured professors were male? Or male and female during your time?
Well, I can't remember if they were all male that we were working with, but I think probably they were, or somebody from the administration probably was. So, yeah. But, I never heard anybody really complain about that. But I know I just had a really good relationship with it. And I couldn't believe, I didn't know that much about the finances or anything. Well, I learned a lot. But I think the really interesting thing lately is this article that was written about me, and I've got a copy for you, in the Vanderbilt Nurse in the summer, all of a sudden was picked up by the medical center. And I do have a little discriminative thing to tell you that happened to me recently. I belong to a forensic group. And of course, I originally established that forensic program, and these people all are examining people in the criminal justice system. And I came in one time, I was bringing a neighbor down the street who had just moved from Pennsylvania, wanted a job, and was interested in forensics. And I, told him I was going to bring her. She had her PhD. And of course, I really wanted to help her, as her husband is a very important executive for Health Spring, the health insurance, Cigna Health Spring. So I thought it'd be really good to be good to her. Well, I put on my badge to bring her in to a Vanderbilt building, and it says Professor Emerita, which shows that I'm retired. Well, some male who was not really affiliated with Vanderbilt but examines people started in on me. What was I doing being retired over there and coming to these meetings and everything? I was humiliated in front of this guest, and I've never gone back to a meeting since. But guess what? When that article about me appeared at the medical center, they picked it up and sent it out to everybody in that group. And I got copies of the responses. We didn't know all of this about her. That's wonderful. I mean, they just saw an older person and were kind of diminishing me, except at one point, one of the psychiatrists said, do you think, because sometimes we had meetings at other people's houses, not always at Vanderbilt, that I could get this criminal court judge to come to my house for a meeting and they could ask her all kinds of questions? Well, of course I could. And they came. And I think they were testing me about, quote, how powerful I was. So some of that kind of stuff still goes on. I don't know if it'll ever go away, but anyway.
Yeah. How, well, I guess what was your favorite memory of Vanderbilt?
Well, the students who sometimes still contact me. Actually, this fellow wasn't a former student, but we used to have hall monitors at night to check people in and out when they would come in the evening, and one of them was a law student. And years later, he left a message for me at reunion. I'm running for judge of blah, 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 blah. Can you possibly send a contribution to my campaign? Of course, I sent a contribution to the campaign. But he had also gotten a degree from the divinity school in addition to law school. And he was preaching at an African-American church. And I went to church and heard him. And I got a lot of attention because I was the only white person there. But people were very gracious and nice to me. So, you sometimes still have this contact. And then I have another contact. When I was associate dean between 1981 and 1984 of the undergraduate program. And I had a student who was the daughter of a very, very famous nurse. And when she was graduating that time, I took her out to lunch, and she sobbed and sobbed. How can I ever be anything? Look at my mother. I said, you'll find your own way. Just do the best you can. Well, eventually, she found a topic that was different from her mother's, taught at a university. And recently, there's something, and you'll see, it's called Fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. It's for nurses who are considered outstanding. Her mother was a member. This young woman was admitted in the first mother and daughter thing, and they contacted me. And then I was just contacted recently. She's married, and one of her sons is coming to Vanderbilt. So, little things like that. You never think, what's going to happen down the road. And that's been a really big surprise to me, that I've heard from both male and female students about themselves later on, which I didn't expect at all.
I guess, what do you think could have, if anything, anything that would have improved your experience at Vanderbilt?
Well, not having those first 2 years with, the chaos going on with the dean. And by the way, after 2 years, he left. and went up to a place in the Midwest. And, but, you know, there's always certain kinds of stress. You know, one of the spooky things we used to do when we left Vine Hill Clinic, which was in a housing project, we could never leave by ourselves. We'd always have to leave in a group because they were dealing drugs outside, and it was dark. You know, spooky things like that. But, you know, you got used to it. And, but generally, you know, after that, it was a very, very nice experience. And I gave a lot of talks. You'll see I've given a lot of talks all over the country, and was invited to do that, and it was very, very stimulating and so forth. But I had one funny thing happen. Be careful who you show this to. My final evaluation from the current dean, who was associate dean at the time. She said, "How much did you publish last year?" I said, 7 articles. She said, "Ooh, how did you do that?" That was it. But it amused me afterward. She didn't ask me for a list at all or anything. Of course, she could always get it. Anyway, I almost just recently had a panic attack because my administrative assistant that I've had since the end of the 70s, her computer got all blocked up, and she had my only copy of my curriculum vitae. And the last we'd done is I'd given it to the University of Michigan when they requested it. And I never thought, you know, you think you're retired, you're never going to need it again. Well, I knew I was coming to this, and maybe you'd want to see it. So they just undid it and fixed it yesterday. This has been going on for several days. And she met me at the University Club out front because I'm afraid to go into garages right now. That's why I couldn't come here alone, because I get in there and I sometimes have trouble breathing. So I want my husband with me. But anyway, so she came and met me and gave that to me.
That's really nice.
You know, there's a lot of very positive things. This administrative assistant I had, I helped hire her. And she, at one point, was pregnant. And I told her, I said, "We have to talk to this baby. We want to talk to this baby all the time." Well, she was afraid because I was in forensic that the baby might hear something he didn't want to hear. But anyway, to make a long story short, he's grown up. He's graduated. He's working on his PhD. And he was really, really, really smart. And she can't believe. I think genetically he probably would have been anyway. But anyway, and she's never forgotten it. So we've made friends. And normally they don't allow you to have an administrative assistant after you leave. But they're very kind and help me with things like that. So, you know, there's some really positive things.
So they carry on your legacy by always being supportive of you?
Yes. I've had some health care issues lately, and the dean called me up because, you know, you're assigned to a development person when you're funding a scholarship, and she was really concerned, and I said, well, things were much better. I said, of course, you know, if I die, you get a lot more money first. And she said, oh, no, we don't want that to happen. So, you know, you can joke about it. But I think the environment is pretty good now, and you know, students I come in contact with. And I always go, our scholarship student, I always go and hear their final paper, although this year I couldn't go because I had some medical appointments I had to keep when she was presenting. The other nice thing about this is that my husband has become very committed to this scholarship. And we meet them every January at a dinner. And I don't have any influence. They tried to initially say that it would have to be somebody who was interested in forensics to be awarded. I said, no, anybody who's interested in anything, you pick the best candidate, which they do now. The faculty selects them, and we agree with that. And they've selected really great people, and they've gotten really, really good jobs.
And so this is your own scholarship?
Yes, it's named after me, Joyce Laben Scholarship.
And when was that started?
When I retired.
Okay. And that's through Vanderbilt only, the Vanderbilt School of Nursing?
Right.
Okay. Did you see the environment change while you were teaching to when you retired?
Yeah, I think there was a lot more camaraderie between faculty and students. It kind of loosened up. And the quality of the faculty, so many of them with doctorates, and there were 2 people recently recorded who are coming to the School of Nursing at Vanderbilt who have outstanding backgrounds, and I'm just thrilled at the way, when we almost got closed down at one point, how wonderfully they're doing now, because it's so important, not only for absolute care when you see a patient, but for research and publications, to develop programs.
So you said camaraderie between faculty and students, or within faculty?
Well, I think within faculty, but also between faculty and students, that they're willing to listen to them, especially because they're graduate students now, and they're able to listen and help.
Was there any interaction between faculty members, and you said your students lived on campus in a specific dormitory? Were there any interactions on a day-to-day life between that, or was that their personal life kept separate?
Pretty much personal life comes in. But I have pictures of bringing my students to my house. We lived in Mount Juliet for 32 years. My husband's a Bostonian. We would have lobster parties and put whole lobsters in the pot and give them. And I have pictures. There are many students. Yeah, before they would graduate and leave, the ones that I had contact would always come to my house, so on. And when the University of Michigan just recently asked me to make contact with these students from Michigan, what I told them is, I'll take you to lunch or dinner. It's my treat. So, I think that's a real positive move to show them another side of you.
Absolutely. Did you see any change on campus when the Women's Center was founded?
I can't say that I do, but I think the attitudes, changed a little bit. And I think that since you see, especially in nursing, more and more people getting doctorates and master's level, they're more collegial with other people on campus. Although the recent, problems in the dormitories, I think was really very serious. You know what I'm talking about, I'm sure.
I don't think I do.
The rape trial.
During what time? 2013. All right, that was before my time here.
Well, they were charged then, but the trials went on later, yeah. And it was nationalized all over.
And things like that weren't occurring at Vanderbilt when you were teaching?
Well, they have boys and girls in the same dormitories. You know, when I went to Michigan, I don't think, no, the male students, even if they were in nursing, did not stay in the nursing dormitory. And there was a house mother. You know, you during the week you had to be in at 10:30, and I think when you were a senior, on Friday it was 11:30, and Saturday was 12:30, and when you were a senior it was 11:30. But you had to be in at that time, so it was monitored pretty closely. I don't think when I first went to Michigan, if I'd been in a dormitory with men and women, even though I grew up between two brothers, that would have been comfortable for me. So, you know, but I was concerned about the publicity that Vanderbilt got because of that.
Right. So has your perspective on Vanderbilt changed since leaving?
No, not really. I'm very, very, very loyal to it, and very, very interested, and I still have a lot of friends. I had to laugh. The dean called and asked if I'd talk to a former faculty member. She said, "I'll give you a minute to go and get the phone number," and I said, "It's in my brain. I don't have to go." So a lot of us, especially the ones that taught together, still communicate and are friends with each other. And one of them who retired, her husband was very ill, and they needed a lot of help with their things in their house repair. I'm married to a man who can fix anything. He went over, and I cannot tell you what he did. In addition, they had a car that hadn't been driven like in 10 years. He fixed the car, traded it in, got a good sum of money, and then she needed a new car. He went and helped her get a new car, negotiated with her, and she paid 11 years after her car $1,000 less than she had 1,000 years before. So, it's not only me, but somebody like that. And to this day, we have somebody on one side of us where we live who works for Microsoft, and another pilot on the other side, especially the pilot. My husband does a lot of fix-it for the pilot. And he has to have his blood pressure taken twice a year. He's in his early 60s, and it can't be high or he can't continue to fly. So 2 weeks to a month before he has it done, I bring him over, and we go through it, and we redo how to relax, how to do it. And he's passed since, because his wife said he needs to keep working. So in many ways, you're never really done. And I call myself a navigator.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'll give you a good example. Tivis Nelson, the fellow who helped manage the money and save the school of nursing, he owned a lot of property. And one day he called me up and said that this young woman who was renting her place, the mother was visiting from another state and needed some assistance. She was having mental health problems and was having difficulty working. So I arranged to meet them at a restaurant in Green Hills. And the mother came in. Her first question is, "How much is this going to cost?" I said, "Nothing." And what I did is I arranged for her care and followed her. And because she had an important job, and would meet her sometime for lunch and so forth. Well, eventually she became engaged and was getting married in another state. and wanted me to come. So my husband and I packed up, went up there. And when we got to the reception, we sat at this table. No one had assigned us anything. The mother of the bride came flying in and said, no, you have to sit at a special table. They put me next to a provost from Ohio University who had had health care issues. And then the minister who married them was on the other side of my husband. And the groom, and by the way, they're still married, came over and thanked me for what I had done for her. But the funniest part was we were looking around after we got to town, and there was a place where they were growing plants, and my husband wanted to go in there and look. And they noticed our license plate from Tennessee. What are you doing here? And we said, we're going to a wedding. And this is what the person who ran this garden asked me, are you the one? And I said, I guess so. So the word had gotten out in the community that somebody had helped her, and she was able to continue with her job. Now they've moved out of state. His job moved them. But when she had a baby, she invited us over, and she was doing a wonderful job with the baby. So, but I never treated her. I just helped her get treated. Oh, and then when the father came, he said to me, where do you go to church? I said, go out on Hillsborough Road, look up, and you'll see a big steeple. That's where I go. It's interesting what people, want from me. And I still have people at my church who, I had somebody who was having real difficulty with his wife and couldn't get an appointment at Vanderbilt where he wanted to get it in the Department of Psychiatry. I have a former student. She wasn't really a student. Her father was my dentist. And she was at Harpethal as a student and needed a project. She was 16 years old. I took her into Vine Hill Clinic at 16 years of age. And at that time, TennCare had just come out, and she'd call for appointments for me to see people because she had to get special permission. She went on and went to college and was deciding whether to be a psychologist or a nurse practitioner. And so I was in private practice. She asked if she could spend 6 weeks with me. Well, she could, and you can imagine the kinds of people I saw, especially the people from the mental health court. And she decided and became a nurse practitioner and works at the clinic. And so I called her. And she got an appointment for this fellow, and his wife was really having problems, and helped her. But, I'm able to do those kinds of things. Like I said to my husband, it's payback. She's got to help me get appointments sooner, but, So you never know when you're going to have contact, and people come up and ask me. In another kind of thing that I saw one time, I sat next to the parents of the senior minister, and the mother had diabetes, and one time she came in and she handed me, this is the antibiotic I'm on. I went home and looked it up. Don't give it to diabetics, it said. And the side effect is Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Now, I heard that you could die from that. I never seen it. I got on NIH.gov, and they showed pictures. She had some of that symptomatology. I said to my husband, get in the car. We went to where they lived close by. And I sent them to the Vanderbilt Clinic, and they took her off of it. So it's just little things like that, that you do, and people still, come up and ask you. So it still goes on. Are you tired of hearing about me?
Not at all.
Not at all, but I do think
we are done.
We're going to have another one coming in.
So that's good.
But thank you, Joyce.
Thank you so much.